Ready whenever you are.
Rest well, gentle Osric. Without a glance back, Queen Marixa slid her hands into her daughters and departed the royal crypts of Millendear, never to return. Cold and obedient, Annis began to lead the way back up the numerous steps, followed by her mother. As Lysa began to leave as well, did her eyes linger for a moment? Did her hands slowly trace the side of the burial crypt longingly as she moved past? In the quiet of the tomb, the old nanny and the young prince stood silently before the final resting place of King Osric. She remembered what a beautiful baby he had been, full of life and boundless energy. He had run her ragged as she tried to keep him from mischief. She had seen the lad take over the mantle of king when his father died, trying to run the kingdom under the oppressive and at times dangerous regency imposed upon him by law until he reached the age of maturity. He was a good boy and a better king than his father ever was. He deserved better than the end the smiling goddess wove for him. He deserved a wife that loved him and children that doted after him, not the scornful brood that witch spat from her wicked womb. Had she known what the future held, she would have smothered the newborn Gerhardt and declared him stillborn. That spiteful and power-hungry boy pushed his poor father into acts, each more dangerous and foolhardy than the last, just so that he might meet a glorious end in battle suitable for a great warrior. She cursed as she thought back to the speech the prince had given at court on the eve when the regency of the kingdom was to be decided. When things didn't go his way, the prick decided to hide himself among the cantons to make sure that his father did not survive the crusade. No sooner was his father dead than he ripped the bloody crown from his proud brow and placed it upon his own begotten head. My poor Osric body hadn't even cooled yet when that boy defiled it worse than that horrible creature. Prince? Bah! No better than a looter he is, she mumbled through her toothless maw. She glanced over at the boy standing beside her. At just a few months shy of 15, the boy already towered over his siblings. He stared at the crypt, his countenance betraying a war between confusion and sadness. Perhaps it's not too late for this one. Mayhaps he might be turned and forged into a worthy son for you, dear Osric. I do not understand why they are calling my brother bloody King Gerhardt behind his back, Nana. My brother's neither a butcher nor an evil man. Patting him in a consoling way, Tezca cooed, no, my sweet prince, no, he is not. But many saw him wearing the bloody crown taken from your father where he lay and cannot help but wonder. Wonder what, Nana? Gerhardt needed to show everyone that he was king, didn't he? A kingdom needs a king, is what father always said. Yes, my prince, but your brother showed disrespect in ripping the crown from your father's head. It is whispered that the king still drew breath. You know how tight that crown was about your father's sweet brow after the devil creature smashed him on the head. That crown saved his life that time, but I've heard that Gerhardt had to pry the metal crown, wrenching it off, and doing so caused his death. For many moments, no words were spoken, though Willem's breath came heavy. Finally, he stepped forward, bent, and kissed the top of his father's crypt. Turning to Tezca, he saw fire in his eyes that she had never seen before. And when he spoke, she heard steel in it that made her heart leap with hope. If that's true, my brother doesn't deserve the crown, and I'll make sure he pays for his crime. Smiling broadly, Tezca whispered to the young prince, what more could a father ask? This is the kingdom of Millendear in the world of Arcanis, Shattered Empires. It's a dark, gray, twisted place filled with political machinations, even among the places that are considered the most bright, law abiding, and hopeful, leading the way into a better world. Joining me today is Matt Blank. So, once again, I've reached deep into the archives of Living Arcanis and looked for those folks on that old Yahoo Talk group that were participants, were integrative into the campaign, who saw the potential and joined in wholeheartedly. So, Matt, um, my fellow now New Yorker, has had the opportunity to hold many important roles within the campaign. But the most important role, I think, is always being a gamer. So, how did you become a gamer, Matt? Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Sure. Thanks, Ed. And I started gaming when I was in high school. I had played chess originally, and some people from who had played chess with told me about this game that was coming out soon called Magic the Gathering, and
Ooh,
I got really interested in Magic the Gathering. And then from Magic, I started getting into Dungeons and Dragons. And then when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, I was uh, really only like a power gamer, right? I wasn't really interested in the story.
that's the magic part.
And yeah, exactly. The magic to D&D gateway. It's, how do you come up with the best combos? And I had been playing I played D&D for a while, and then I remember my friend Rick, one of my close friends, Rick, asked me if I wanted to make a character for this new game that was coming out. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to learn a new game. I was already playing Greyhawk, and I eventually he convinced me to. I remember he goes, oh, well, you can be Sonic. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I haven't been Sonic before, so I think I'll give it a try. And so um, I made a character, and I confess that I made a character based entirely on numbers, not really on the story.
Mhm.
And that was my introduction to Arcanis. And then I remember playing the games for the first time, and it was just really different. Like it really challenged me in ways that I hadn't really, expected from D&D, especially at the time, right? There's a lot more of that now, but at the time, especially, there was really almost, at least what I was playing, there weren't really gray choices, right? It was always,
The heroic choice was obvious. The
right.
enemy was obviously evil. There was so um what I discovered over the years, because um a little classic study, you start to understand what Greek tragedy really is and what tragedy really is.
Hmm.
And tragedy isn't that bad things happen. In fact, tragedy is when you have to make a decision. There are two equally good choices, and either one, something bad is going to happen, even though it's a good choice.
Yeah,
That's what the classic tragedy is, and that's what they pulled in.
yeah, I completely agree. I think, I went from being, the min-maxiest of min-max, gamers where, we would in the game you would, a kobold would basically tie an innocent person to a train track, almost like Snidely Whiplash style. And you go after the kobold and you do all this stuff. And then I remember playing Arcanis. I remember one of the first modules was
Shall you reap?
your Mandragore. Yeah, so shall you reap? And I remember, it's like if you read a really good book or you see a good story or a good movie, you just sort of need to like sit with it for a minute. And I just remember having that moment where I had to just sort of sit with that, right? Like just sort of like, oh, that happened. I mean, it was like I don't know, the best way to, it was like, it was like the moment when you learn something, right? And I think actually now, I have a son now, and it's where I see those moments in his eyes, right? Where he's like, you can see like the moment of understanding, and he's like, oh, I'm, gaining. I can see him gaining experience if you'll, like
Mm-hmm.
in that moment. And I,
Mm-hmm.
I remember at the end of that first module, I was like, oh, okay, this is D&D, but it's not limited to D&D, right? It felt more like I guess like art really in a lot of ways than in the art that
Is
happened to
that
be D&D shaped.
the classic? Like that's like I said, you were experiencing classic literature. And one of the things I want people to understand in particular that so third edition was Magic the Gathering, just rolling dice. So that's why you found it an easy crossover. And the truth is, though, it didn't matter. Even though you were a min-maxer, that didn't make you a bad player because nobody had anything other than the numbers of the characters to go by. So you had no choice but to. So what it did is it kind of and it turns out in some ways it was necessary in the beginning. You needed to create the most min-maxiest character you could so that you could then experience. You knew you were secure, your survival, you're gonna make it because you're as tough as you're gonna be, and it allows you to then experience all of the things going on around you that are story and character driven
Yeah.
that you discover some years later, oh, that moment was actually important.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of moments like that in the campaign, especially in the first year when I was first, really introduced to it. There were just a bunch of times where you'd find out this person you were working for turned out to have not necessarily, well, ulterior motives, not necessarily good or bad motives. And I think that was something that, I remember Henry and I remember Brian did a really great job of like some of the first arcs, right? There were no classic good guys. There was no like there was nobody who was like a saint, and then there was nobody who was just like truly evil. There were people who were thought to be purely evil based on, the story and the plot and what we knew about them, but there were very few absolutes, and I think it was really fun to sort of get to play in that world, um, that where there weren't absolutes.
Right. So let's talk about this is, one of those rare times, and I probably, after I continue finish this season, I will never ask this question again. So tell us about your character.
Oh man. My character was he was named Eric Valtenson, and he was a Melindesian knight. And he was I don't remember the specifics, but I remember he was, again, I started, in my defense, I started as a min-maxer,
Mhm.
and he was, basically the best fighter tank I could put together with, my knowledge of the rules. And so he was I think he was like oh, okay, actually, I do remember. He was this was in 3.0 before 3.5 even.
Mhm.
And he had his whole shtick was the vampiric claws tree. And so he would take damage and heal damage, and it was a lot of fun to
Mhm.
play him. And then, as the rules changed, he changed a bit, and as the story changed, he changed a bit. But yeah, he was kind of a wide-eyed, innocent Melindesian knight.
Mhm.
And he was really only innocent because I was innocent at the time. Like I didn't really have an expectation of like what to expect from Arcanis. Like the other games that I played, there were, what your background and backstory wasn't really as important as, your numbers,
Mhm.
right? And so, that was sort of the mindset I went into it, and Arcanis very quickly changed that for me. But yeah, and then,
And you were playing a psionicist at this time,
it was
or
a psychic warrior, I think, in
okay,
3.0. Yeah.
okay. So there you are. You're a player, first year story arc. When did you hit your first big con? Because I assume you started playing locally.
Yeah, so we played locally, and then we went to, oh my goodness, I do not remember which con it was, but I remember two of the players in our group, Sean, who played Captain Jack, and Rick, who played Avalabebi. Uh, I remember the whole thing with the Damned happened, and just to give a little backstory, the Damned was this ship. It was an airship, and basically we're at a convention, and people were, being asked to, effectively go on a suicide mission with their characters. And I remember Sean and Daryl were running it, and I remember my friend Rick, they were like, okay, only Altherians can go. And so, again, I had two people who were Altherians in our group, and then, they were like, well, we expected more people. So, uh, and then, yeah, I remember Rick saying in character, well, he's my brother. This man is my brother. And I was like, okay. And so we went on, and it was, our group. And it was absurd. It was just incredibly fun experience. And I remember like that was when I was 100% in. Like I was already really 100% in, but I really kind of dove in
And this was
after
the
that
Battle of
experience.
Samar.
Yes, that's right. It was the Battle of Samar, and it was
So it
the
was the Eltharians with their blast powder flintlocks against. Originally, as I recall, the battle started against the Saracen. One of
the
the
Sethric, yeah.
yeah, one of the various lizard man armies. Because there's also a Saracen, Black Talon Saracen, are a player character race.
Hmm.
But then there were all the other variants that you're fighting against, and then eventually the Malfelon, which are another group of the Allori, the elf
The
equivalent.
the Allori who hated humans, basically.
Like, yeah, we're genocidal
Right.
murderers when it comes
Right.
to you.
Hated might have been too weak a word to describe them,
Correct.
but yeah, and and the Allori players were all, very pro-human because of the plot of the game, where, the Allori felt that the humans would be needed to save them against the
Hmm.
Great Darkness, and the Malfelons just reject the Allori player characters had all embraced that, and the Malfelons were just like, nope, that's not true. These
Yeah,
people are awful.
I interviewed Peter Parker, who played Aquila Kine, who was fine killing humans, but just was not gonna. And he abandoned his table. He left the table at the Battle Interactive, and it was it was so in character that when he went to the judges and went, "Hey, look, man, this is what I have to do." They found him another table and said, here's a bunch of here's a low level table. Go clear it of Saracen. Go do some damage. And he
Yeah.
did, yay, which was, that is so typical, right? You getting to go on this special mission, that's not that. I mean, I think Paradigm really created this desire for lots of special missions because they were really doing it and making it spectacular. And then when a player came up and said, "Look, this isn't going to work for me, this scenario," they found a way to give that individual a special mission.
I I always look like, not always maybe, but looking back at it now, it's almost like the difference between, going to your local bakery versus like a national chain, right? Like when the baker, the person, and like that, you
As
have
a
that
chef, I
interaction with
love
people.
that analogy. I that bueno because I live across the street from like the best rustic French bakery in New York City,
Hmm.
right? And that's what I try to explain to people. This is it's there's a difference and this is a part of because of my profession, right? So there's always this dichotomy as a chef. There's always this pull
Hmm.
of, you want to do the maximum good for your community and you want to make good food accessible to everyone, but luxury exists for a reason.
Right.
And you need that to help drive the other part.
Yeah.
And that's what I saw that PCI does is they've created this luxury product that when you're there and with them, it's like I'm at my bakery. But when you go out into the world, you can still play in that world and you're still getting that luxury product.
I I think the only thing I slightly disagree with is that is the most luxury products that have a barrier to entry, right? And I think that
I think
what
that
PCI did.
no, Living Arcanis has a barrier to entry. You can't be a murder hobo.
Okay, I mean, I guess that's
That's
more
it.
that feels more like table stakes to me, but I
All
guess that's
right.
a fair point. That's a fair point. But I think the point I was trying to make is, like if you invested in the game would invest in you, right? And that was
Agreed.
something that was just not the case in the other games at the time, right? Like, yeah, okay, you couldn't play a murder hobo, or if you did, it had to be a knowledgeable choice, and you had to sort of play against the type, and sort of that had to be like part of your story and your gameplay and that kind of story. But I think that the thing that was so, engaging with them at the time is that it really was a community. There wasn't like it felt like comparing it to other games, right? It felt like, the other games at the time would just sort of here's your module, you may play it, and then that is it. But in this, it just like it felt like we were all telling a story together.
Hmm.
And, I mean, I'm still friends with Sean and Daryl and Henry and all those
Hmm.
guys to this day,
Hmm.
right? I mean, Rick, I was the best man at his wedding. Sean and I are still close. I mean, all the people I play with, I mean, all the people I played with and really, really played with,
Hmm.
I don't keep in touch with as often as I could, maybe because it's been a long time and, my
Way
life is
world
very
works.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, those people, really were big parts of my life because it was something that was really important to me, and that that the kind of community that they fostered was really something. It was really something unique and special, and I'll always remember it.
Well, so my only experience with the other living RPGA, so when it was still all together, was so there was I so a major difference between Living Greyhawk and Arcanis is it doesn't matter where you are in the world. In Arcanis, we're all playing in Arcanis, in Onara, or wherever the adventure takes place. And in Living Greyhawk, everything was regional by geographic region, real world.
Right,
So I was in Kentucky. I knew all these folks in Ohio, different regions. So I hosted a game day, a game
right,
weekend for them to come to a new region. I mean, I was like, what? I don't even there's no, this is just a random walk through the woods, occasionally killing some things. There's not a story here.
right,
I don't even see a connection of threads that went to something greater. And if you're not connected to that region, then it seems it's really hard to understand what's happening unless
right,
you're involved in some message group where you're obsessively reading what's happening in every single region.
right. Yeah, and
And
they also had like the regional games and they had like the national games. I don't remember what they called it, but it was like like the ones you could play, like the con games,
right,
basically, anybody
big
could
con
play.
games, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that in some places the regional story was um more loved than others, right? I think
Right.
I know Sean, for example, I know spent a lot of time working on making the in the tri-state New York area, the regional storyline was something he was really engaged in. He really took that. I think that, but I think also a lot of that came from Arcanis, right? Like I think that we all experienced that game, the Damned and the story arc from Arcanis, and again, I remember like the Damned was really where it really brought me into high gear. Like
Mhm.
we took that back and like tried to do our own versions of that in some way, right? We tried to make sure that the games that we were involved in and were running were done with at least trying to be the same level of care and expertise that Henry and team did.
So,
And
well, let's talk about that a little bit. So the scenario is there's a suicide mission. This is the only way we're going to be able to save the Republic of Altheria, and you jump on a flying boat. Then what
yep.
happens?
And then for the entire time, there were just way too many bad guys on the thing. There were flying lizard men, and it was just like every turn, it was just there were people going down every round. It was just like it was just a brutal combat, and we had I remember Sean. There are not many storytellers who are really capable of running a combat like that, and Sean was one of them.
Hmm.
And um, just a great story. Just we had to get the ship, keep the ship in the air for a certain number of rounds to get to a place to crash the ship into something to survive the day. It was basically the really broad strokes premise. And just I remember my friend Rick just like sonic blasting people out of the sky, and I remember like being on the side of the ship, keeping them from like getting onto the ship with reach weapons, and Sean just shooting people with his Arthurian guns, and just like it was just a really it was just like it was like that epic moment in a movie, right? It was like the first time I got to feel like I was playing in like an epic movie, and it was it was just an incredible experience. And the whole thing was so well and lovingly done that it just you couldn't help but feel it when you participated in it.
So you've had this moment, and you've had this epiphany introduction with that first game, and now you've experienced really kind of a um, peak role playing moment.
Mhm.
But was it the peak? What happened after that?
Well, I mean, it wasn't the peak of the story. It was certainly it was like the
Peak for
first.
you. I mean,
Oh, for
peak
me,
of fun, peak of experience. What happened next? So there you are. You came home. You said you guys just wow. You talked about that. How do you recreate that? And so
yeah,
what did you do?
I mean, we tried to in like the modules that we were working on, the games that we were working on, like we took elements of what was so incredible for us and just tried to sort of expand them. And then, Arcanis, was also growing I remember the next big convention, I think it might have been Origins, if I recall correctly. But the next one I remember, they had this idea to um run a LARP, basically, which was just something that just wasn't really done uh, in, in that type of gaming, right? There was
Not in
just
the
not,
RPGA. That wasn't a part of the RPG.
yeah, it
It was
was,
a separate thing.
it was just not, it just wasn't part of it. It was like, I know a lot of people expressed to me that they tried it because it was an Arcanist thing and they had very like low and poor expectations, but it was really, I mean, it was really incredible. So uh, I got asked to play King Osric, the boy King Osric, and so I was every now and again I would do like a little bit of like a throw in my voice and let my voice crack when I could.
Mhm.
But and then I will never forget this one either. Daryl and Christy were working on this, and I remember I didn't know that they were going to try and assassinate Osric during the LARP. So I was genuinely surprised when that happened. So we're at the LARP and a Sethric agent tries to assassinate him and I think that I was generally afraid because I didn't know what was happening and I think it came across really well. But I think what was so cool about the LARP for me at least is I got to see like at how excited everybody was to participate in a game in that way, right? And so just to back up a step, like the prem like in most D&D games are, you need to fix a problem, right? You
Mhm.
need to go to a place, you need to fix a problem, usually with overwhelming violence, and
Mhm.
then then whatever happened afterward is just happened, right? But in the LARPs, right, it was like, you know, I just remember Henry did such a great job of like balancing it. And so like everybody needed something. So, each NPC had these goals they were trying to do, and then they had things they could trade. And so it was like a horse meat, right? And but the thing that was really interesting about it and really what made it so cool for people is that the NPCs couldn't talk to each other, right?
Mhm.
Like, I couldn't go over and talk to the head of the church whose name escapes me at the moment, but like, I couldn't talk to him. I had to have
Sabinus.
Sabinus, thank you. With I remember I will never forget Eric describing him with his sausage finger, his Vienna sausage fingers. Um, uh, you couldn't just like talk to him. They couldn't just like have it. So you had to have the telephone game of players going there and every player was so invested in this game that like every player had like preferences and what they wanted things to happen and like some players tried to join the entourage of NPCs they didn't like to try and like sabotage them from within and it was such like it was really just like an ode to player agency, right? Like there were so many things that happened during those encounters that you can't script, right? Like
Mhm.
you can't you have to just trust people to help enforce your vision and like that was something that Henry was so good at, right? Like you know he's just a phenomenal storyteller, not just in terms of like but just like it just even just telling a story, right? Story time with Uncle Henry is always one of my favorite
Right.
one of my favorite things to experience. Um,
So
and then
in this this LARP, because they did more than one, didn't they?
we there were a bunch. Yeah, there
All
were a
right,
few.
so this I want to try to track through them. So this first one, this was the focus was what? Was this the convocation of the divine?
I think so. I
So
think
this
so.
is
This was many real life years ago. So,
yeah, I know. I'm trying to remember because so this is the one that the one I participated in as an
Mhm.
NPC, and I think it was after that where you were actually the focus. They were trying to find you, they're trying to get you hooked up. And my NPC was a gnome who was trying to convince you to give us a homeland, to give us a place to
Right.
live, right?
That's right. I remember that.
So the
Just to back, just because gnomes in
yeah,
Arcanis are they're
yeah,
not like classic D&D gnomes. They're not like the little hats. They're like disfigured, and they're kind of like cursed creatures.
right.
They kind of feel a lot of the same things that like tieflings do now, right? Where they're sort of like disfigured and cursed, but like um
Well, see,
it's
I always
different.
said so. You've got now in fifth edition you have tieflings, but we had Darkkin,
We had, right, Darkin were different. Yeah,
right?
Darkin were
So
dark. I always thought,
gnomes,
sorry.
yeah, that's okay. That gnomes, so they are the byproduct of a human and a cursed dwarf. So dwarves by default are cursed giants,
Hmm.
and that curse in transference creates a misbegotten, malformed, bipedal being.
Right,
Those are the gnomes. They are the Dalits, they are the bottom, the untouchables.
the Untouchables. Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. It was
Yeah.
it almost like you'd see someone with like leprosy, right? They would be treated like they were like lepers in a lot of ways.
So what I did as an NPC, I found a costume shop
Mhm.
nearby where I lived in Lexington, and I found the most gorgeous, over ostentatious kind of Renaissance era costume. So I was just like, and the truth was is the NPC was actually loaded, like had a lot of money and not enough influence to really land the deal.
Right,
It was very, very frustrating because all I could do, right, was go to and that was the other thing is I only had like three people.
right,
There were only three people who were
right.
willing to work with the gnomes.
But you know what though? That was something that I thought was really cool about the LARPs, right? Like I remember like, you know, because I played Osric, right? And like Osric was, like the young king, and he was a very well-known character, and he was like a very good, morally upstanding character, right? Like a lot of people wanted to work for him.
Hmm.
And you know, I had a lot of great interactions with those people, but I also think like, if I had, let's say, 10 people in my entourage, right? I can only split my attention by 10, right? If you're one of the three people who's working for a different NPC, you have a lot more like direct
Agency.
power,
Yeah, yeah,
agency.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really,
Yep.
which I thought was a really cool, thing that happened in those LARPs kind of organically, right? Because to your point, right? A lot of the players, wouldn't want to work for a gnome because gnomes were generally reviled, and
Mhm.
but it was such a cool change because like, I'm sure that some of those players, like some of who you only had a few players, right? Like they
Mhm.
had such a great experience because they were constantly doing stuff. Whereas as Ostrich, I felt, sometimes had a tough time making sure that all of my players were engaged, right? It's
Right.
like, it's a different experience depending on, who you are playing and who you're working for. And you know, it was such a fun change to from what I had done in the past.
And this is the same. And I remember the other thing that happened at that LARP. So first off, this one it was at Gen Con.
Okay.
So it was really, really well attended. And I was very surprised at how well that faction style game setup, because I wasn't quite sure how they were going to do it. Because there's no, it's not like a vampire LARP. There's no player
Right.
versus player. There's no rock, scissors, papers. Um, and then one person showed up. Now, what was it? They were wearing the coat of 1,000 eyes or something like that. Do you remember?
Oh, that's right. There was a cursed item called the Robe of a Thousand Eyes, and I remember somebody had made a jacket of a thousand, like they put a bunch of eyes on this jacket, and it was
Right.
I remember that it was very cool.
Right. And they came in, and of course, that was a bad thing. And though there's no player versus player, it was decided and allowed. And I think basically the character said, yeah, man, I just don't want to play this character anymore with this cursed item. Go ahead, let's kill him. And so, he showed up, and the team allowed that character to be removed from story and in an epic way.
Right. And I think also I didn't have this language at the time, but it was basically like a Nordic LARP, right? Like you couldn't have stuff happen to your character at the LARP without like you agreeing to it. Right. And so like, that person they collaboratively told a story together, and even that player who was clearly invested enough to like literally make a robe with eyes, right? Like was understanding and cool with like helping advance the story in that manner, which I
Yeah.
thought was really telling as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was also, I mean, it was such an interesting because like I always felt a little bit bad for Henry after the end of every LARP because invariably like something crazy would happen and he would have to like,
Change
figure
everything.
out how that would make sense or how to like make that work.
Hmm.
And I always thought that was it's it's such a rare thing for you for someone for players to have that much input in a game that they love so much and then the game to sort of respect that those choices and make it work.
Well, he was very adamant. So I've told this story before. I knew Henry and Peter from Giant Gila Monster Game Store in North Miami. That's where I met a lot of the initial gamers because that's what I did when I traveled all over the country. I was stationed all over the country, and that was always my first stop was finding the local favorite gaming store. And so I met those guys, and my first time playing anything with them was Vampire LARP. And they
Mm.
were they were very involved in LARPing. So I knew from the beginning that was like a big thing they wanted to make sure they were able to incorporate eventually. But in those initial discussions before and early on as Arcanis came out, Henry was very, very clear that, actions have consequences, heroes can shape the the narrative. Heroes' actions matter.
What was the other one that they would say all the time? Stupidity leads to character creation.
I say that all stupidity leads to character creation. Yep.
Yeah.
The
I,
in At the last Gen Con in Milwaukee, I'm sitting up in the stands with a bunch of other of the judges, and they're marshaling the tables, and I got all the GMs to start chanting, "Stupidity leads to character creation. Stupidity leads." So yeah, no, that's still a thing. Still a thing. So you are you still playing at this point? Are you still playing your own character, or are you just kind of focusing on bigger story
oh
stuff?
no, so I'm playing my character. But I'm also playing Ostrich at like the LARPs when they happen.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm just, really just enjoying the story with everybody else.
Right.
Just a different way to enjoy it, like with the opportunity to play Ostrich at the LARPs and everything. That was just a different. I felt very lucky that I got to enjoy the story in that way. In addition to being a player who was also really enjoying the story, I still really enjoyed the whole story. I mean, still to this day, candidly.
Hmm. Did you so at some point as you start looking and paying attention to Team Paradigm, there's some new names. So tell us how that came about.
Yeah. So I got involved with, I was running a gaming store at the time as well, and I was, I got obviously I was a big fan, and I ended up working,
Wait, what? You ran a gaming store?
yeah, for a long time. I was called Neutral Ground in New York, and we ran
You
it.
ran Neutral Ground?
Yeah, yes, I ran Neutral Ground for a long time. Yeah, I wasn't the original owner, but I did run it for a long time.
All right. Well, that's just so people don't know. And, in New York City, that's serious fucking gaming chops right there. I mean, everybody knows Neutral Ground. So, so all right. So there you are, bigwig, New York City, running a gaming store in Manhattan. And then what happened?
And then I just started, I was really interested in the campaign and the company, and I just started like working on various projects. I think I started working on, I think some edits for Forged in Magic. I think I just did some there. I wrote a couple modules, and then I got involved as the living play coordinator. And so what that meant was, if you wanted to, like you were giving the example, you were running a game for friends in Kentucky, right? You would ask, hey, we're running this gaming convention, is there anything coming down the pipe that we can premiere? And we
Mm,
would, often work with the games to like help, drive attendance to the cons as much as we could. We would say, oh, we have this game coming up, and you can be the first one to run it. And then you had like a few, maybe like a month or so before we released it to the public.
hmm.
Um, and so like I would help in that regard. Like I would coordinate, the modules and get them sent out to the cons and um, things like that. Really.
Okay. And so this was like before the end of their relationship with the RPGA, or
Yes, this was while it was still part of the RPGA.
okay. All right. And all right, so there you are, you're a coordinator. What else have you done? I mean, are you at this point, obviously I haven't seen you involved with the campaign for a while, but it wasn't only took a couple nudges to encourage you to come and talk about it. So you still obviously,
Well,
have some affection. What's your relationship with the game now?
I have a lot of affection for gaming, broadly speaking. I mean, I still play in like home game with some friends of mine. I actually ran a game that took place in Arcanis for a while. It was without getting too deep into it, it was basically uh, the world had been ruined, and I loved the idea that sort of like in real life, right, we sort of still find buried things from previous civilizations, right? And so
Hmm.
there's a whole game system based on that, which I forgot what it's called. I think it's Cipher, but there's a whole concept of like lost civilizations and things like that. And so I ran a home game that took place on a flooded world, which was mostly water, and sort of as the and none of the players had played Arcana, so I got to like really sort of mess with them. I was like, oh yeah, you could, if you want to be a Sonic character, you could do this, or you could be this type of person. And so, but it was basically the world of Arcanis, but you know, like 10,000 years in the future.
Oh.
And so like they would, find different things out, and I had like
Mhm.
some flashbacks, and there was a magical dagger that had the spirit of a Kadic, a Kadishan warrior that taught one of the players. And one of the things that I did was I sort of messed with sort of like the perception of things. Like for example, in their classic Arcanist, there was the Dark Triumvirate, right, which was you
Hmm.
know near the god of destruction and fire, Narath, and Sarish, who's the god of blood and secrets. And so in this, they had kind of rebranded and I called them Trinidad as a sort of a joke to like the real life Trinidad and everything. And so it was Sarish, the god of communities and contracts. Near the god of fire, warmth, and creation, right? Narath, the god of of death and rebirth, and like
But those are
fungus
those are absolute
and
legitimate interpretations, 100%. That's one of the things that I loved about when I start thinking about working on developing my own Arcanist games and at for home is I can just go, oh, well, there was this whole era where the way people worship the gods just became, oh, this is just how we do it here.
right.
You can do that. That makes sense to do that. That's
Yeah,
really
and
cool.
and that was like how they decided to sort of like keep power, and like only like the very most senior people in the church like knew like the origins, and the knew about Canceri and all the stuff that happened before. And like it was fun because like the players didn't know, right? The players that I'm playing with had never participated in Arcanus, right? So they didn't really uh they didn't know, although
It
they've
was
learned.
like discovering it again in the very beginning when you did,
Yeah, exactly. I tried very hard to give people that sort of moment.
Did
But yeah, I'm
you?
still gaming. Oh, sorry.
Well, okay, so did you make it through the whole original story arc, the Koreani Civil War?
Yes, I played. I, I, I kind of, I kind of stopped gaming as much, when my son was born, and then COVID and everything, and so, yeah. So I kind of had to sort of, I couldn't, and also, candidly, I had gotten, more into like the into LARPing and things like that.
Hmm.
So I played in like, more LARPs, and that was where a lot of my time, ended up going. But I played through the whole Civil War arc. I remember very fondly the ending of that. I remember, I mean, and like, to your point, like I'm still close with people like Chris and Sanders, and like all the people that I've played these games. Like I remember, Chris is a great example, right? He's somebody I only spoke to online, and I only got
Hmm.
to play with at conventions.
Hmm.
And our characters were close, and it was this, this whole, but like we became like real life friends over it. Like we like met through the game, and like have stayed friends and still talk to each other. And even though he lives across the country from me, right, we still, stay close. But I played through the Civil War, and I think that, I don't remember the exact timing, but I remember like there was just a point where I just didn't have time, and I think there was, then also remember my store was closing, and I had to do a lot of stuff around that, and so, so it was it kind of sort of, if I fell off the gaming stuff, and actually, during COVID, I started gaming again because it was really one of the only things I could really do. We were gaming online with friends of ours, and I joked that we only would allow parents in the game because, it's
Oh,
hard to explain to a non-parent, oh, I'm sorry, I can't play today because my son is upset. I need to go. Like that was always tough, but like, it was a weird sense of like camaraderie, right? Where we all sort of understood that that was just like part of life, right? And I remember, my friend Jeff was the first non, parent to get to come into the game. But that's, that. But yeah, so I started gaming again, during COVID, and that's when I was playing a different game. A friend of mine was running a game, and then I started running this game, and I just decided to. Um, my son, is obsessed with Hamilton for various reasons, and so the line, oceans rise, empires fall, uh, really inspired me to sort of make this like, Waterworld-esque version of Arcanis in like the far future. And I've also always kind of been obsessed with like the idea of like ancient sci-fi stuff, like, you're like cavemen who find like, laser guns, right? Like
right,
I've
right.
always found that really, really cool.
Expedition to the Barrier Reefs.
Yes, exactly, exactly. But I've always
Barrier
loved that
Reef, not
as
reef.
like a con as like a concept. Yes, sorry, you're right, you're right. But I've always loved that as a concept. Like I've always loved, like, my favorite book, growing up was Foundation by Isaac Asimov, and like there's a, lot of that type of, you know empires have fallen, but like they fall in the bones of other empires, and like what
Mm-hmm.
happened, and like the idea that, something from the ancient past is more powerful than what you have in the present because of, you know various reasons, and that. So
Magic.
right, sometimes it's magic, sometimes it's technology, right? And so that's
Yeah.
that's also something I've had a lot of fun playing with in the Arcanis game. Like you know what is Altherian magic versus Altherian technology?
Yeah, I've been
uh
thinking about that a lot actually lately because I played my first um LA Living Arcanis game the other week, and I'm creating a gnome
hmm
Altherian priest of Althairs.
hmm
And I really, that's like, yeah, man. And I'm looking at all the spells oh, you should take create and destroy water because you what can use the create water to make mechanical devices powered by water. Very
nice.
Eltharian, right?
Yeah, that's cool. I love stuff like that. And like, again, like, growing up a big science fiction fan. So like, Arthur C. Clarke's line, any technology, advanced enough is indistinguishable from magic, right?
Mhm.
So I think about those kind of things a lot, and that's the kind of stuff that I pull from it, and like so it's been really, it's always been a big part. Gaming has always been a big part of my life, and I've really enjoyed, you know, um, reconnecting with that
Yeah. Well,
lately.
and that's what, this series of podcasts are about right now is that reconnecting. Um, you know, I have covered my backstory a bit multiple times, but of course, I'm a long COVID survivor, and I've had to step out of my profession, and I've had a number of peculiar changes in my understanding of myself. I have a recent autism diagnosis that kind of helps explain some other things in my life. But in the end, what my diagnosing psychologist recommended for ongoing therapy and health was to hang out with gamers, play D&D, reconnect with my people, with my tribe,
Mhm.
with my friends. I mean, it's like it's one of those things where it, like you just said with Chris Sanders, it is one of the easiest ways to make friends. And I liken it in this way to the military, in that, there is a friendship, a bond that happens between service members who serve together and go through trying times that or just accomplish a mission together. This is, I think, one of the things that as a modern culture, um, we lack in our community building because we don't build barns together anymore. We don't help each other bale hay.
Mhm.
Um, and that things like Dungeons and Dragons at least give us a replacement
Yeah,
where we can have those opportunities.
it's so interesting. Like I met my wife through gaming, right? She was my friend for a long time, and we eventually, changed to dating and eventually got married and everything. But like, we have these like interesting shorthands because we've like gamed together for so long. And like I
Mm-hmm.
think about it, right? Like, like some of my closest friends, like I met through gaming. Like one of my favorite Arcanis experiences, candidly, is I was able to. I remember a friend of mine was playing Arcanis with us, and he was like, you add up dice so quickly," and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I throw a lot of fireballs. I don't know what to tell you, but I remember like he was talking about how like his daughter was having some challenges with math, and I remember I was able to like help his daughter by like you know having her play with us and then like having to do the math when you play the game, right? Like little
You
things like
figure out
that.
how to group the dice so that you can create fives and tens. You
Yeah,
find a way to put the
exactly.
numbers together so they come together quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
And you help, and like you talk about like the camaraderie. Like I've never served, although I have a ton of respect and a lot of my friends have served. But like I think about this like, I think about like, I was mentioning, various people earlier, like Rick and Sean, both Sean's, right? And
Mhm.
like, I had that experience. I had a similar experience with them through Arcanis, right? Like, I had this memory of, you know, experiencing something and like trying to do better. Obviously, the stakes were much lower, but I still have those kind of like positive memories and like positive associations with them. And like even now, right? Especially during COVID, right? Like especially during COVID and having a young child, right? Like it was very isolating for everybody, right? And like
Yeah,
that.
you ate a whole bucket of pickles.
I ate a whole my amazing wife somehow got me a bucket of pickles because like at that point, I don't just a random aside, uh, all no one knew what to do, and so like all of like the restaurant companies were like selling to direct to people, and so you know she found this group of people that just like sold a bunch of stuff and including pickles, and they said like a barrel of pickles, and so I had like a whole bucket of pickles, and it was one of my favorite things to just reach back and pop the thing open, grab a pickle from the thing, and just and have that pickle. I worked my way through those, and now I can't get a bucket of pickles. It's a really a tragedy. But no, all joking aside, right? Like the you still let me make those connections, right? Like just like you were talking about, like those things, like you know, almost all of my closest friends I either met through gaming or have gamed with,
Hmm.
right? Like I think like everyone who's been in my life for like a long period of time, really, I've sort of done that. Like that's been our connective tissue. And then, like I also remember sometimes like I was and I had the game all prepped and everything, and we were all there, and then like we just ended up just like chatting for like 2 hours.
Hmm.
And then I was like, oh, I guess I could run something, but it's already, 10 o'clock. So maybe we just, but like that's the thing. It's like it's such a great connective tissue, right? It's that commonality, that hobby, that sort of like shorthand, that tribe that you were talking about, right? That kind of that kind of feeling and togetherness and accomplishing something and like, kind of going back to what we started talking about in the very beginning, right? Like you know, I had defeated kobolds who were tying people to train tracks, and that was fun. But like, I'd never like uh saved a country with them.
Mm.
I'd never like, and like that sort of really for me deepened those bonds and made those experiences, you know, much more important to me than like defeating the kobold of the week, for example, right?
Yeah, I discovered I was very fortunate. So I'm, you know, probably 2 decades older than you. Um, and I didn't know how fortunate I was until like I left home, joined the Navy, and discovered gamers who had grown up without ever being able to play. That they just owned all the books.
Yeah.
Whereas, I I still have a group of gamer friends from junior high. We are the May Weekenders, and um, yeah, man, we have a message board that's designated to us. For years, the way we became the May Weekenders is once people started getting married, we rented a house and did a 4-day gaming weekend, and that just became a yearly tradition until everybody's kids were too old and their lives became too enmeshed in the real world like yours is. But um, yeah, still in connection with those people. I go back as often as I can. I do a fishing trip and I try to kind of reconnect with those people in person at least once a
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, and it's so true. Like, I mean, some of my like, I remember we would, we basically did like, I don't. It's not like wasn't like an Arcanis weekend, but like it was just like a bunch of people who played Arcanis. We went to Disney. We met up with
Mhm.
like Henry and Nelson. I think Pedro for a little bit as well. And
Oh, that's
we
cool.
got I remember we got thrown out of Disney World. That was
That's a
fun.
highlight.
That was some I'd never thought that I would get thrown out. I mean, I didn't get thrown out to be very clear, like, but there were definitely security guards behind us making sure that we were headed out of the park, not back into the park. So that was
Mm,
something that um but yeah, it was those bonds, to your point, like those bonds are just there, right? And those are bonds are there forever. And like, you know, I don't like who I am is so changed by those moments and those connections and those people. And and again, like the people I'm closest with, all I've either gamed with or I've just like happened to have known forever. Um and there's a lot more people that I've gamed with that I'm still really close with than people from like high school, right? College.
yep. Well, thank you so much. I steal the line. You've wasted another perfectly good hour, but no, I really appreciate the time. This is the kind of thing, though, we haven't spent time gaming together, but we know each other from the online conversations. We've stayed in contact through social media, and it's all around the community of a setting,
Yeah,
the Arcanus, the world of Shattered Empires. And so that I think is a great testament to the power of not just role-playing games, but this setting in particular. So,
yeah. I'm looking forward to a very fun full circle moment when I can bring my son to either Origins or Gen Con and he can meet everybody and be kind of a fun,
do
you know.
Origins first. Do Origins first.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely want to do Origins first.
Yeah, yeah,
100%.
yeah. All right, man. Take care. I appreciate your time.
Thanks. This was a lot of
Have a good
fun.
weekend.
It was definitely not a waste of an hour. Thank you.
Good, good.
All right. Bye.
Bye.